Chapter 21 The Demon Catacombs. It was such a nice day outside. The sun was shining, there was a warm breeze making the grass move as if waves on the ocean, and a picnic was always delightful as far as Miranda was concerned. A large quilt was spread on the ground underneath a large tree, and she was serving sandwiches that she had just prepared to her father, her uncle, Harkinian, her cousin Zelda, and of course the young man whom she had met on the road. They laughed, ate, and Miranda remained in the wizard's arms while stories of recent events were shared. She was so happy, and smiled while closing her eyes for a kiss. But it never came. And when she opened her eyes, the perfect fantasy was gone. Letting out a small moan as her mind slowly accepted that she was in a different place, her breathing became quick and rapid while she looked around to see nothing. Complete darkness surrounded her. So she reached into her pocket for the candle but dropped it, and was shocked to feel it graze off her face on its way up. No, not up. Nothing fell up, and as the result of the contents of her pockets fell the same way, Miranda realized why her head was hurting so badly. It was because she was upside down. Relaxing for a moment to test this, her arms fell above her head, but unfortunately she was unable to reach the ground.
"Hello?"
she said, barely a frightened whisper.
"Is anyone there?"
She might not have been able to see, but there were sounds, flowing water and soft echoes each time some dripped. From that, she guessed that she was in some kind of a cave, but how had she gotten there? She remembered going to Spectacle Rock with Ganondorf, so was she a prisoner there? No, she remembered trying to escape with Zelda, but Miranda was the only one to get away, and then she had hidden from the Moblins. Yes, that was right, she had climbed into a drainage pipe to hide, and that was when everything became distorted. She couldn't quite remember what happened next, but certainly it resulted in being hanged upside down. Well, she couldn't just spend the rest of her day hanging there, since Zelda was still a prisoner, and it actually frightened her to think what Ganondorf was doing to her at that moment, so she tried to sit upward, but there was some kind of material hanging in her way. No, it wasn't hanging, it was her dress falling upwards over her face from being in that position, and suddenly she was glad that no one was currently around. Once she pushed it up out of the way, it was easy to pull herself high enough to feel the strange, sort of slimy, waxy substance that was bonding her feet to the stone ceiling. Whatever the substance was, it was strong and resilient enough to not be sliced when she tried the grapple of her hookshot. Everything else had fallen from her pockets, so her only option left was the bracelet, which pulsed as it gave her the strength to break the waxy material, and quickly crashed to the floor. The good news was the floor wasn't very far away, but she struck her head on the way down and wasn't sure how long it had been before the next time her eyes opened. She had an incredible headache as she sat up, and she was bracing her arms for an attempt to stand when her hand rested on something familiar. It was the candle. Thankfully it was magic, so the 2 inches of water flowing across the floor hadn't damaged it, and when the dim orange light filled the room, the next item she reclaimed was her skeleton key, followed by over a dozen small pieces of Ganondorf's recorder that she had stolen. Smacking the watery floor, Miranda felt horrible now, since the object had been the only way she had of getting back to Spectacle Rock in order to save Zelda. But then she noticed something else. There were white objects on the floor, dozens of them, and she thought that they were animal bones until she looked up and saw the rotting body hanging right next to her. If she hadn't been so frightened and stunned at the same time, she might have screamed. But as her mind began to work again, she realized that being loud was a bad idea. The armor that this person had been wearing had been torn open by what looked like claws, and most of the flesh underneath had apparently been eaten. Suddenly feeling sick to her stomach, Miranda turned away to vomit, but stopped when she found yet another object discarded nearby. It was a small chest, and when she picked it up, Miranda gasped when she saw it had the emblem of the royal family. The only way to be sure that it was Zelda's was to open it, since only a female member of the family could. So she pressed the latch, and a much brighter green light began to fill the room when she cracked the lid open. It was definitely one of Zelda's chests, meaning that this hanging body was the poor knight that had been sent to hide it in the first place. She felt terrible for him, having suffered such an awful fate while following the orders of his princess, and she would see that he, along with any others, would be buried with full royal honors when this was all over. For now, however, she needed to take the chest and escape. The knight carried a sack, so she took it, and had just relocked the lid of the chest when a new sound caught her ear. There was some commotion coming from down a nearby passage, so she dropped the chest into the sack, which she then tied around her waist and extinguished the candle so that she would not be seen by whatever had done this to the knight. Something shrieked as more orange light came from the corridor, followed by the sound of movement and growling, as if there was a fight going on, and this worried her since there were only a few creatures that could produce flame. It was not a two-headed Gleeok or anything similar to appear shortly later, however, but a robed figure that illuminated the stone dungeon each time the flame gathered in his hand, tossing fireball after fireball as he backed into Miranda's chamber. There was more shrieking from unseen creatures until the robed figure tripped on a bone and fell onto his back. He let out a cry of agony after falling, and his left arm hung useless as if broken, but the most concerning thing was the Zora that leapt upon him an instant later. He tried to toss the flame at it, but the creature was too quick, knocking his arm out of the way and making him scream as it sunk its teeth into his shoulder. Reacting to this purely on instinct and ignoring her own safety, Miranda stood up and fired her hookshot in an attempt to save him. The creature groaned with surprise as the grapple sunk into its shoulder, and the good news was that it was now ignoring the robed figure, but the bad news was that it was now focused on her. It grabbed the chain and started pulling, and since not enough time had passed to be able to use the bracelet again, she was pulled off of her feet and was now being dragged towards the Zora. There was nothing to grab onto in order to stop herself. Not that she would have been strong enough anyhow, but then the creature shrieked again as the robed figure struck it in the face with another fireball. Apparently these creatures really hated fire because it ripped the grapple out of its scales before running down the corridor, allowing the hookshot to retract as she got to her feet. The robed figure was also moving again, but he was having much more trouble than she was. So she bent over to help him, and they both gasped when they saw each other's faces in the light of his flame. It was him, the one who had posed as an evil wizrobe to rob her father's carriage, and whom she hadn't been able to stop thinking about since their kiss. "You," he groaned while reaching his arm up towards her. "Please, we have to get out of here. Help me." On that, they could agree, and she wasn't about to just leave him there, so she took his good arm around her shoulder and allowed him to lean heavily on her, when he tried to stand. He looked like he had been dragged through hell, large bite marks on his body and his arm broken, but as much as she liked the idea of his body against hers, Miranda's biggest concern was obviously now that they were moving.
I don't know the way out,
she whispered, trying to hide her fear. "I do," he groaned in reply, pointing at the floor. "These are the overflow sewers for Lake Hylia, so follow the water because if it can get out, so can we." It was a good plan, and it embarrassed her that she wouldn't have figured it out on her own, but it also let her know that this blue-skinned young man also had a strong mind on top of the athletic frame that she could feel underneath his robes. Then again, she couldn't believe that she was having thoughts like this while Zora were trying to eat them. And speaking of the fish monsters, there were more coming. She didn't want to use her hookshot again since it was dependent on her being able to stand, so they kept moving while he tossed flames into the darkness. "Hechizo!" he called out while pointing at the nearest creature. Instead of flame, it was a bright light that engulfed the creature, and when the light faded, it had turned into a bot that the other Zoras all immediately attacked, probably no longer recognizing it as one of their own. This went on for what felt like hours, although Miranda was sure it couldn't have been that long. Still, it felt long, as they continued to follow the flowing water while scaring off the Zoras until finally, a light could be seen in the distance. It was a drainage pipe at the end of the corridor, like the one she had climbed into, although she doubted it was the same one.
"Almost there,"
she said to him.
"All we have to do is get out that pipe, and then I'll get you some help."
"Don't need help," he replied with a pained voice. "Just need time, uninterrupted, to heal myself with magic." The Zoras seemed to be backing off a little the closer they got to the pipe, and now Miranda could hear the pouring rain somewhere above them. Then there was a flash of lightning, followed by an incredibly loud crash of thunder that made the fish monsters scurry back into the darkness out of fear. This was good, since now she had time to set him down and help him get out through the smaller pipe, and it was discovered that the rain had really picked up once they were outside. The sky was getting dark, and the wind was blowing harshly, meaning that night would soon fall. But there was hope since Miranda recognized the area.
"That's Port Hylia over there!"
she exclaimed, pointing to some buildings off in the distance.
Come on. We'll be safe if we can get there.